And this is something I've actually been kind of standing in opposition to here, because you'll watch the news and there will be some member of the clergy on to comment on seemingly everything. I'm exaggerating slightly, but there'll be a political discussion and you'll have to get, the minister's view of it. And it happens in the local communities as well as, the national news. I remember a CNN brief piece, but it stuck in my mind forever because the banner behind them was, "Why do atheists inspire such hatred?" Of course, I immediately point out the question is flawed because it presumes that we're the ones inspiring this, rather than why is hatred directed at atheists? Because then it could be our fault or their fault or a combination. So asking the wrong questions is probably one of the biggest problems in the world right now. But they had a panel on to discuss it. How many atheists were on that panel? None.
Really?
Not one. 2 Christians and a Jew to explain to the world that atheists were just really bad at PR, and that we didn't have any morals to live by.
My sense is, by the way, and again, I mean this is a positive, my sense even in this country is that a lot of the religious leaders, they don't quite want to tell you what they really believe, which is a step in the right direction. And my impression still is that most of them know that the culture has shifted or is shifting significantly enough that they know that some of the things they might believe or might have claimed 20 years ago have become total landmines for them.
So here's what we'll do. You come down to Austin, we'll take a drive to San Antonio, and you can listen to John Hagee, who runs one of the biggest churches in the United States, talk about how nasty atheists are, and if they don't like God's country, they can get out of the United States, boy.
He must be about the only one who hasn't been caught with a rent boy. Haven't they all, almost all? And I notice any, and late friend Christopher Hitchens used to have a great riff on this, that whenever you saw any of them holding forth on moral issues, you just make a note, and before you knew it, you'd find they'd maxed out the credit card trying to pay some rent boy.
The scandals are
almost consistent rule.
So
I'm amazed Hagee. I don't know what the laws of defamation are like in this country, but I'm amazed Hagee is already not.
Yeah, well, and he's just one of many examples. There's some that are, and this is another problem with the internet. There's a pastor, I'm not even going to bother saying his name because he's already gotten too much publicity. Tiny church, and yet broadcasts over the internet, which gets him all kind of attention, mostly from atheists who want to just say, "Oh my gosh, this guy is terrible." I don't know what percentage of church-going Christians actually care what this guy says, but he's awful with regard to women and everything else. But when we, clearly there's going to be differences. I wonder if how much of the differences that we're seeing are actually related to differences in culture. Because I have some rather troubling questions related to culture. And as you've spoken a lot about issues related to multiculturalism, I figured maybe we could address some of that, because what does it mean to say British culture, Western culture? Is there even enough uniformity of value for that to be a meaningful phrase? And what is it that we should be worried about losing if that's diluted?
Yeah, that's a huge one. We're all trying to think about this at the moment. And there are versions of it that sound nicer than others. Some are horrific. We have this big discussion now, what is our culture, what is Britishness, and every country in Europe is having that discussion, and I hear it here, I hear it in Canada. Sort of constant self-examination. There's nothing wrong with that in a way, although it can cause what I regard as being a kind of breakdown. I mean, if you said to any individual all the time, who are you, what are you, you'd end up on the couch quite fast. And I think it might be the same for societies. If you just keep asking what you are rather than just getting on with it, you can kind of instigate an increased nervousness.
I think my instinct is to not care.
Right.
I'm happy to adopt whatever labels apply to me and to explain what those labels are, but there's nothing about me. this actually bothered my wife a little bit when I said so, because she's a little more, she cares a lot more about her heritage and her history and the people from,
Right.
you know, the Appalachian Mountain or the Smoky Mountains and things like that, and what those people have gone through. And I don't want to be just dismissive of history, but you know, one of my ancestors was the preacher who was the founder of one of the first 3 Baptist churches that became the Southern Baptist Convention. And apart from it being novel, I don't care about that.
Right.
But there are also people in my past and cultural ties I could make that I would be, that I don't view as negatives,
Right.
but they're not me.
No, but there's another French philosopher, Alain Finkielkraut, who recently said in an interview something I was very struck by. He said, we in France used to think that what we had was worth taking around and giving to the rest of the world. And then we retreated from that idea. And he said, now we're in a position of thinking, can we at least still have it for ourselves? And I was struck by that because, again, it might be a thing of, you know, depending where you are and what you've seen, but I given some of the things that France has gone through in recent years, some of which I write about in the book, you know, multiple really terrible terrorist attacks and assassinations and so on, I can see why they are getting nervous and wanting to address some very fundamental principles. You know, is what we have in the secular French state, which allows for religion, but you know now is dealing with new problems, is it all vulnerable? And I know a lot of people who feel it is. And I suppose another thing, I mean, I spend a lot of my life as a journalist traveling, not just, you know, across this country and North America and across all of Europe, but the Middle East, the Far East, and Africa, and so on. And there is a definite feeling you get in certain places of, well, I don't want to enforce my own view of my own society on this, but this is very different, and it reminds you, therefore, that what you have is unusual. And I suppose that at different times, people become more aware of how, gotta be careful how you say this, but how lucky we may be in this country and in the country I'm from, for instance, that we're even within this discussion and freely able to have it and so on, and that some things down the road might stop that being the case. So I think that there are moments when societies become kind of febrile like that. Let me give an example. I mean, if any of you have ever been mugged or seen something terrible on the street, you know,
We're in New York.
so it changes the way you look at people for quite some time afterwards, and maybe forever.
Yes.
If you've seen anything really brutal in the middle of a sophisticated, cultivated place, it will fundamentally change the way you look at everything afterwards and the way you look at people. And, you know, this is the case with conflict zones, war zones I've been in. You know, it's not just that you come back from those places thinking, my God, I've got an idea of how lucky we are to have this settlement we have, but also why people who are from such places have put it this way, have one less layer of skin than everyone else and feel certain things early. And that's the case in certain countries in the West at the moment, and that's partly what this book is about, that certain countries, France being one, are really reevaluating some of this because they are seeing futures that they want to avoid.
I can see that. First of all, I recognize that, you know, there are people who are going to have experiences that are going to change the way they view things. That doesn't change whether or not their view is accurate.
Sure.
But when it comes to this idea that we need to protect our culture, whatever it is, from some other culture, that just doesn't seem to resonate with me for any reason, because maybe it's because I'm you know, the standard generic privileged white American dude who doesn't care that much about his past, but I view things in terms of there are right answers and wrong answers to how to do things, and different views of what was right and wrong have existed in different cultures.
Sure.
But we know that some of them were wrong. You know, and I don't think either one of us is a
Spectacularly
remotely
so, yeah.
a moral relativist.
Sure.
That is the thing that I want to hold to. What I view as the value of secular humanism, the value of basic freedoms. If I have a town and a bunch of people start moving to my town and they're bringing their cultural stuff, I don't have any fear that they're going to kill off my culture, because anything that's worth value to me, I'm going to protect anyway. And I advocate for the freedom for them to engage in and support and value their culture, right up to the extent that it impedes on the secular, reasonable, scientific founded, laws and things
it's
like that.
a boundary beating.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to beat these boundaries quite hard, allow a lot to go on within it. But yes, and once certain lines are crossed, you've got to take a stronger view on it.